All right. Well, hey, once again, my name is Stephen Fite out of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I am a children's recording artist and presenter and performer, have been so for the last 25 to 30 plus years. And I'm very excited to be here today with Dr. Brian Mowry. This is my third time, I think, to be hosting for Brian. Always a wonderful webinar, always cracks me up listening to him talk and share his share the information that he has about whether it's math or early childhood assessment. Always some great stories, but also always some wonderful, valuable information for you, the listener and the watcher. So we're very excited to be here today. Just a little bit about myself. I am a songwriter, performer, recording artist out of Oklahoma City. I have been so for about 25 to 30 years, and I've had the pleasure of hosting a lot of the webinars for Frog Street over the last couple of years. And as such, they've always asked me to share a song to get us in the musical mood before we go to our guest. So I was thinking today about what we could share, and Brian was thinking it's going to be impossible for you to find a song to go with assessment, which is exactly right. It was going to be almost impossible. So last night I was thinking, hey, we are almost to the holidays. We're right up on Thanksgiving. Christmas is just around the corner. So I thought, what better song that we could share with everyone today than a song that emotes the holidays? And what better way to connect it to math, which is Brian's domain, than using some rhythm instruments? Because music is nothing more than a glorified math problem. You've got counting, you've got fractions, you've got all sorts of things that connect it with math. So let me go ahead and share the song with you. It's a song called Sleigh Bells Jingling. It was written by a friend of mine out of Chicago named Fred Cook. And it is just a fun little tune. And it goes something like this. Sleigh bells jingling, icicles tingling, winter's here, we are here together. Candles everywhere, lots of love to share. We'll sing a song for you. We'll let our love shine through together. Now, I love using rhythm instruments with children in the classroom because it gives them something to hold on to direct their attention. And you can call off counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Break it down in 2s, 8s, anything that you want to do. Sleigh bells jingling, icicles tingling, winter's here, we are here together. Very simple song to sing. One more little chorus. Sleigh bells jingling, sleigh bells jingling. A little tag out. So if you are not using rhythm instruments in the classroom now, you can add them to most any song and work on all sorts of math properties with them. So thank you very much for listening. You can go to my website at melodyhousemusic.com, melodyhousemusic.com. You can find my materials at Stephen Fite Music. Right there within that website. You can also follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Stephen Fite Rocks, on Twitter and Instagram at Stephen_Fite. And if you'd like to find out more about this song we just sang, you will find it on my product page as well on the second page. Just loaded it in yesterday, as a matter of fact. So, all right, well, just a couple of notes about today's webinar. Now, if you are not a member of the Early Childhood Learning Solutions community here at Frog Street and here at edWebinar, we would love for you to join. It is absolutely free to you, and there are so many bonuses when you do. So many resources at your disposal, such as online discussions, edWebinar recordings. You can go back and watch every webinar recording that has been recorded thus far, featuring artists such as Dr. Jean, Mary Jo Huff, Dr. Becky Bailey, Steve Spangler, Dr. Pam Schiller, and even Dr. Brian Mowry. Before he was a doctor, by the way. You can also take quizzes for CE certificates, and you can get those certificates emailed to you 24 hours after you take those quizzes. and you can see your edWebinar activity on your edWeb homepage. So we invite you to join the Early Childhood Learning Solutions community at edweb.net. Let's see what this next slide holds for us. Now, to get your CE certificate, if you are watching this live, you will be emailed your certificate via the email that you use to log in. If you're watching this as a recording, you will need to go to the quizzes and take the quiz for this webinar, and you'll receive your certificate shortly thereafter. So I think that's about all I have. I think Brian would like to say a couple of words about Frog Street Assessment. Take it away, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Steve. We also at Frog Street do offer assessment that takes the headache out of your testing. It's simple to do, just click and go. It's all done through the computer. And the bullets there advertise some of the key features that you get results that can be printed out and also deliverable to parents. It has some multiple demographic options as well. Again, it can also provide reports for administrators, and also we offer the assessment, most importantly, in both English and Spanish. So we encourage those of you who are interested in the Frog Street assessment, do keep in mind that it is a 4-year-old assessment. We don't have one currently for 3-year-olds, but that is something that we're working on. Actually, we will, and I will discuss later on during our webinar, a new assessment that we're putting forth that will come out pretty soon. I'm going to give you a preview of our new 0 through 5, meaning birth to kindergarten readiness assessment that we'll be looking at. And then we will also have option of a Frog Street CDA. This is for those of you who are looking ways to get your CDA work course online. We offer 120 hours of online coursework, and also continuous instructor support with live chat and discussion forums. Our concentrations, of course, with Frog Street is infant, toddler, pre-K, and family service home visitor.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. Well, it is time for me to roll out the screen and hand it over to the person that you've all come to see today. Brian, we are very, very excited to see you again, and I hope that you have a wonderful next 55 minutes, and I will see you on the back end. Everyone enjoy.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks again. Welcome, everyone, and I'm happy to be here with everyone once more. I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what we'll be talking about today, which is assessment for early childhood. Many of you are aware of the growing impact that NCLB has had, and when I say NCLB, I'm talking about No Child Left Behind, has had on the early childhood forum. And most importantly, it has given greater spotlight to administrators wanting more information on child outcomes and how children are performing. And with that comes in what we have all experienced in early childhood, a greater or a more profound emphasis on assessment, and assessment taking up our time. And so today I want to talk about managing all of that information that you're having to do, and that all of the data that you're having to manage on having to prove outcomes and student outcomes to show that early childhood is indeed making a difference in students' lives. But in doing that, we don't want to burn out teachers or burn out children at the same time. And so we're going to be talking about those issues. And I have here in our next slide some of the goals that I'd like to talk about is that when we do talk about assessment, we want to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate. And today, a great portion of this webinar is going to be looking at how we need to stay within the framework of what developmentally appropriate practices means for young children, and what some of those assessments and what some of those components and options are of that model. And then also understanding the research foundations that underlie that assessment framework. And then also look at simple tips and implementation suggestions that will help you complete formative assessment and both summative assessment in the classroom. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get started and talk about some of these issues. I'm going to start with a screen that has well, let's just say a very silly question to it. Which is the best tool for building a house? Now, when you look at that, hopefully you're thinking that is a really silly question to ask, because when you build a house, you wouldn't just need only a hammer. You would say to yourself, well, actually, you need all of those tools to do it. And the reason why I'm asking that question is because interestingly enough, we ask the same question about assessment. We ask, well, what is the best assessment for assessing children? And just like there is no one single tool for building a house, there's no single assessment tool for assessing children's knowledge. And so this is the reason why today I want to talk about, instead of thinking about there being a single assessment that can handle all of the needs, we need to really think about an assessment toolbox. In other words, a framework that stores and organizes all of the different tools that you need to do the different types of assessments that you're looking at. And assessment, something to think about with assessment is that what you're actually doing is you are measuring children's knowledge and skills. And so when you think about measuring how much they know, it again is very similar to what tools actually serve the purpose of measurement. So I'm going to ask this question looking on the next slide. When you think about assessing something or measuring something, you ask a lot of different questions. So it really depends upon when someone says, well, Brian, what should we use for an assessment? And my question is, well, what are you trying to measure? The same question I would ask if I was measuring a particular object like a candle. So if I want to measure a candle and know how long it is, I'd use a straight edge ruler. If I want to know how heavy it was, I'd use a scale. If I wanted to know the capacity of how much it would hold in terms of how much wax goes into it, I would use another type of measurement. Or if I want to know the temperature, I use the thermometer. The point being that there's no single tool that can measure those attributes all at one time. And so in the same way, when we try and figure and measure what young children know, there are different dimensions to their understanding and their learning that we want to measure. And so it isn't just measuring knowledge. There's also approaches to learning. There's self-regulation. There's language skills. There's literacy, and there's number. All of those different domains of understanding and knowledge and skill sometimes they require different approaches to assessment, different types of tools, because not all of those attributes can be measured by one single tool. So there again comes a complex issue of how do we deal with all of these different tools that we're having to use for measurement of student knowledge. And the other thing is, it's really not salient to compare children to candles, because the difference between candles and children is that when you measure a candle, it doesn't bite, it doesn't cry, it doesn't turn away from you, it doesn't have its own interest. It stays there and allows you to measure. But however, with younger children, they have wills. Sometimes they don't want to sit down and be assessed. And so this is a very important thing to think about when you're assessing young children. And so to do that, one of the things that we know is that NAYC has created a specific guidelines for making sure that what we do in measuring and understanding what children know and assessing young children they suggested 5 different recommendations for what assessment should be for young children. And today we're going to go through those 5 different recommendations. So the first one being how to make sure that our assessment is strategic and purposeful. Also, that the assessments that we use are valid and reliable, systemic and ongoing, integrated with teaching and curriculum, and something that can be shared and communicated with stakeholders, which includes parents as well as administrators. So in the first plane, when we're looking at what it means to be strategic and purposeful, I think that what I'd like for you to concentrate on this slide is looking at the green and the red boxes. The green being what is considered developmentally appropriate, and in the red, what DAP calls in contrast to developmentally appropriate assessment. They list here 4 beneficial purposes for doing assessment, and number 1 being that assessment, when we test children or assess children, it should be about helping us adapt our curriculum to meet their individual needs, and also monitor children's progress to know that what we are doing with children is making a difference. It can also, however, be used for a different purpose, which is evaluating a program's effectiveness. And I caution about number 3 because in evaluating and improving program effectiveness requires a very different assessment measure than what planning and adapting curriculum to meet children's individual needs would require. And then also there's a different type of assessment that we need to screen and identify children with potential learning disabilities or special needs. Now, when we look in the red column, you see a different perspective on how assessment is managed, meaning that assessment's done, but we don't really use the information to make decisions. And that here's something that I see. If you look at the third bullet in the red box, it says, doing the assessment takes an excessive amount of time and attention away from interacting with children. That is a problem I'm seeing all over many classrooms, is that assessment's becoming a heavy burden, that it takes too long, and it interrupts everything that teachers are doing. And also something else that, again, as I pointed out earlier, when I talked about the question about, is there a single tool for building a house? Well, nowadays it seems as though administrators think that there's a single assessment that can be used to make high-stakes decision-making about children's entry into kindergarten and special needs referral or special education referral. And that can be dangerous, and I want to talk about the reason why. So in our next slide, what you'll see is the argument against doing high-stakes testing in early childhood. When I say high-stakes testing, I'm talking about making decisions about young children's futures in education, where they go, what programs they get into, based upon a single test measure. That's a very inappropriate way to use assessment. However, that's happening in our current culture of accountability. And there's one reason why. I'm going to give you 4 reasons why that can be dangerous. One is that we know that young children at ages 0 through 8 are typically what we call developmentally unreliable test takers. And this is due to the fact that they sometimes struggle to understand assessment cues, such as certain types of instructions, situational prompts that are outside of their interest range. And sometimes they really are just tired, they're bored, and they don't sit down as well as, let's say, if you were to take an assessment, you could monitor and self-regulate and put aside your own needs and wants and sit down and focus on a goal of getting through an assessment. For young children who are still developing self-regulation skills, that can be problematic, getting them to want to sit down and complete a particular type of assessment. And to be honest with you, on the other side of the screen, we see a little boy there overwhelmed with all of the questions that he's being given. On the other side, you also see a snapshot of an assessment that, unfortunately, I've seen some classrooms give here in Texas over math. This is a standardized assessment that they give kindergartners to determine their math skills and progress towards math knowledge and skills. And just to kind of deal with the difficulty that young children have in following instructions with these type of complicated tests, what they tell the child is, look at the row that has the shoe and find which of the 10 frames shows how many cubes would measure the line that you see that's highlighted there in the box. Now, that's a lot of information for 5-year-olds to take in. And one of the things that we have to start questioning is how much of that assessment is actually assessing their math knowledge or their ability to follow those complex instructions and also to follow through and pay attention. So that's some of the difficulty that we have with early childhood assessments that are coming out there and why those are not the typically best way of getting children's knowledge. Another situation that can be problematic in testing is what we call the Pygmalion effect, which is children being tracked into low achieving groups. And what we found is, Jacobson, his research in 1968 has found that when we start tracking children into low achieving groups, sometimes that tracking keeps up with them and they never really do come out of that self-fulfilling prophecy, that if that's the expectation that is filled as expected of them, they begin to perform to that particular expectation. Now, the other issue that we talk about, and this is very important in thinking about the Pygmalion effect, about self-fulfilling prophecy, is that we really do not want to overburden so much or place a lot of high stakes on children's performance on these assessments, because particularly in preschool, not every child has had the opportunity to learn, because not all preschools are available, or where we don't have universal preschool. We have a situation where there's different quality of preschool. And so when we say that preschool is not working, we always have that question of who is eligible for preschool and how and what was their access to that. Another issue that we have is the fact that children's performance on these assessments that we're giving children, it has shown through a meta-analysis conducted by Laparo and Pianta that only 25% of the variance in early academic and cognitive development could be attributed to or predicted by their preschool or kindergarten cognitive status. And let me explain that statistically, what that means. What that means is it's not saying that how that preschool doesn't prepare children for future cognitive success or academic success, because it does. What it's saying is that only 25% of that effect that we have has that much of effect on their early academic achievement as they move into third grade. Because sometimes we forget that after preschool, they also go into kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. And those experiences also affect their academic achievement and cognitive development. So just placing all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, and saying that early childhood will totally dissipate all of these problems that we're seeing in achievement, that will all go away if we just give everyone a treatment of early childhood. Well, that treatment needs to be continued all the way through second grade, and it needs to be high quality experiences that continues along with them. So just always holding early childhood programs accountable with this high stakes needs of saying that if early childhood if children aren't scoring well on this particular test, and if they're not doing well on third grade achievement tests, well, then why are we spending money on early childhood? And that's a very dangerous causation to make or conclusion to make from that. So to say that, we want to make sure that what we are doing and how we are assessing young children is what we call valid and reliable. And when you look at thinking about, is your assessment valid or is it reliable? When we talk about validity, we're talking about making sure that the assessment actually measures what it's supposed to measure. That's what validity is looking at. So in other words, does the measurement or does the assessment actually measure mathematical achievement? Or does it assess, as we talked before, the child's ability to pay attention? And when we talk about reliability, we're talking about, does the assessment actually render reliable results? Or in other words, if I were to step on a scale and that scale shows that I weigh 172 pounds And then I step on that same scale 5 minutes later, and the scale is saying 132 pounds. The difference between 172 and 132 is quite great. And so what a statistician says is that particular scale must be broken, or it's not reliable, because it doesn't give us a reliable, the amount of variance between the first weighing in and the second weighing in. There's too much variance in between those two. So what we want is to make sure that the difference between our test and retest there's not much of a difference or variance between those two scores. And so that's what statisticians are looking for. What I have here in the picture is, in order to make assessments, particularly for younger children, valid, one of the suggestions I'm going to make in this presentation is that we think about triangulating our data sources, not just relying on one single assessment to make our decisions, but rather take all of the information that we've gathered on children from different points of time during our interaction with them, and then look at all of that holistically and make better decisions about what's actually going on in the child's academic career. That's called triangulation of data sources. And so to do that, we have different types of measures like I talked about before. Currently, there is a strong reliance, or I would call an over-reliance, on summative standardized measures, which they are effective measures for testing knowledge. But one of the things we have to think about for summative standard measures, and particularly for young children, we talked about this before in one of the previous slides about one of the caveats to high-stakes testing is that young children aren't necessarily great with automaticity yet, or they don't have good self-regulation. And so a lot of tests test for automaticity or instant recall knowledge. And some children don't show their knowledge very well in decontextualized situations, such as you can see there where I have the arrow pointing to the M. And in this particular assessment, children are shown the letter, and the letter goes away in 3 seconds, and children become distracted by the fact that the M is disappearing, and they get nervous, and then they lose the whole focus of the assessment, and they don't perform very well. However, a teacher who sees that happening might know, well, whenever we play ABC Lotto, or whenever Malcolm is writing his name, he always knows that this name begins with M, but on this test, he doesn't show it. He's too scared. He won't say anything. Well, that's what I'm talking about in terms of triangulating our data, that you can use the information from these standardized measures, but also use it from other types of informal documentation that you gather that can substantiate the decisions that you're trying to make. Another component that I talked about again that we also need to think about that's a very different type of tool than the standardized measure achievement test that looks at how much children have learned over a period of time. There's another type of test called a summative norm reference measure, and that is, when you talk about norm reference measures are not asking the same question that standardized achievement tests are asking. A standardized achievement test wants to know how much has the child learned over a period of time. A norm reference measure wants to know, at this particular point in time in the child's development, let's say age 4, what is the typical number of children that would be able to perform this particular skill? That is a very different question and requires a very different tool. So a norm reference is looking for a bell curve. A standardized achievement test is not looking for a bell curve. A standardized achievement test is really wanting to see that children have mastered a certain battery of skills, knowledge, and skills. And so they don't want to see a norm curve. They want to see all of children succeeding at 100%. A norm reference test wants to look at typicality in terms of what's the typical median score that we would get, so that we can make decisions upon, when we compare children with other children, is this typical or is it not typical? That is very important to understand when you're choosing a particular type of assessment. And these type of assessments that are norm referenced are typically used to make decisions on children's on programs and how well programs are performing on helping children with academic success in preschool. And usually that's done through a sampling system rather than assessing every particular child. Now, one of the things I also want to talk about is I'm going to bring up a video here that showcases different ways to take assessment. And one of those are when we're sitting down with children asking them questions. This is Taquasia, and she's being assessed on her math assessment. And of course, this is a different type. This is out of context assessment, because Taquasia has been taken out of her learning environment and is being sat down in front of an interviewer and is being asked a battery of questions. Sometimes children don't understand those questions and there's confusion and they don't know how to respond. So we're going to watch this video to look and see how that can be very different from another type of context, which is looking at children as they are actually involved in context. So let's look at this video.
Okay. How about this? I want you to tell me how many of these little green blocks there are.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, that's really good. Okay. So now I'm going to do something to it, and you can tell me how many there are left. How many do you have now?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5? Is that the same as before? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me try again. Now how many are there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good. Okay. So without counting, how many are there now?
5.
5? Still 5?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know?
Because I see it because I count my numbers.
Okay. Because you counted, and now you know? Okay. Maybe we'll try one more time. Now how many are there?
Still 5.
Still 5? How'd you know? You just knew? Okay.
So what you saw in that particular video was Taquasia showing what she knows about 5. And in that particular assessment, at first she was being confounded by, well, every time we rearrange these objects, the number, is it still the same number? Which confounds a lot of children. And actually, she made a discovery during that interaction with the interviewer that, it doesn't really matter what you do with these objects. Every time you rearrange them, there's still 5. And notice that when he asked her a question, the type of information what she was asking, or how she responded, he said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because I use numbers." That a lot of children have a difficult time explaining their thinking, and so sometimes relying on children's verbal explanations can be difficult and to ascertain what it is that they're trying to say. However, that's a good way of ascertaining children's knowledge because you can get the information you need right there and then. However, in the next video that we're going to see children who are actually involved in a real-life context of playing in a block center. And these are 2 boys who are again, playing in the block center. They don't know they're being observed. They're being observed, but they're too involved in the activity that they're working with. So they're not really about trying to ask questions, but even though they're not in a sort of testing environment, I want you to think about, just by looking at what they're doing, that we're able to gain a lot of information about what they know. So let's go ahead and look at this video.
Huh? It could be both mine and yours. Oh yeah, you're making the same thing like me. Yeah, that's what I said. Oh, I thought you wasn't. But I already had that circle thing. Well, but it's up to you and me, buddy. Mother, you can hold that. Sit down now. I really put it in. What else are gonna say to me? Well, how about if it don't reach? I can't reach it. Okay. Like that, okay? Okay. Now you can reach it? Yeah, now I can reach it. Here, buddy. We need 2 more. I mean 3 more. There's something under there. This. Here, one. We need 2 more now. Now we still need 2 more. We need 1 more. Oh, 2 more and 1 more. You were right, 2 more. I was right, 2 more. You was right. Finish. Well, and we gotta cover these up, right? We gotta put something in here. Oh, remember yesterday and we put peoples in here? Do I make that again? Yeah. You wanna put some people?
Now, with this particular assessment, again, the children weren't being prompted to give any type of answers. However, many of you in your posting, I noticed you talked about, well, I saw problem solving. I saw a lot of language going on. I saw collaboration. Think about all the many dimensions in addition to the mathematics that was being assessed here and that could be assessed. And yet this wasn't a sit-down formal type of assessment. This is what we call observation. And when we talk about what informal observation looks like and being able to gather information and use that information to make decisions, well, we know a lot about Arnie and his buddy there, and just what they're able to do. For one thing, just by looking at that video, I can tell that Arnie, the boy that was very talkative, knows what 3 is without having to actually count something. And also he knows something about a little bit about addition, that we still need 3 more. We know we still need 2 more. So we see that in this particular scenario, which is not assessing children in a formal one-to-one context, can also give us good information. So again, what I'm saying here is that one type of measurement tool is not the best type of tool. We want to use multiple ways of measuring children's knowledge. And so here's what we're talking about when we look at systemic and ongoing assessment, that there's 2 different purposes of assessment and 2 different types of assessment, one of them being formative. Formative is carried out during the instructional process of the purpose of improving your teaching and learning. Formative can happen on the spot, just like what we saw with the video of the children in the blocks. Or it can also happen when you're curious and you want to know how a child's thinking about solving a problem, so you ask them questions like we saw in the first video. That's formative assessment, getting a picture of where children are at a particular point in time. So formative happens during instruction instead of being apart from instruction. Let me say that again. It happens during instruction instead of being apart from instruction. And the important part of formative assessment is it allows you to adapt what you're doing in time. In other words, when you drive, you don't stop driving and then assess. You drive and assess at the same time. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near you on the road if you stop assessing when you were driving. I would anticipate that you can do both simultaneously. Summative assessment is simply wanting to know where is the child at a particular point in time. This is looking at what does the child know at this particular point in time. And so what we want to do is think about how can we marry formative and summative types of measures and forms of documentation to gather both of those information, because summative information is what parents want to know and what administrators want to know, but formative assessment allows us to adapt our instruction to meet the individual needs of children. So in this next frame, in this next scene, we'll see is that what ongoing assessment actually entails is an ongoing cycle that starts with setting your goals and aligning your resources to state standards in your curriculum, instructing your students, and then when you instruct them, being able to gather and share data on how the child responds to that instruction. Again, right there and then. After you, however, one of the difficulties, however, in gathering data as you are assessing children right there on the spot as you're teaching, it's difficult to sit back and analyze what has just gone on, because as you're teaching children, you really can't analyze in depth because you're so involved in interacting with children. So one of the things we want to think about is having different types of tools that can help us analyze data. And some of those are rubrics and developmental progressions. And I'm going to show you an example of this towards the latter part of our webinar that Frog Street is beginning to develop for our 0 through 5 population on how to better assess children through a continuum of skills. And that information can then be used to inform parents and administrators about the progress of our instruction. And the child, when we think about assessment, the child should always be everywhere within all of those cycles of instruction. They should never be left out. Sometimes the child gets left out of those different points in time, and we want to make sure that children are at the center of that in our decision making. Because again, remember that young children can't always make decisions, can't always be self-regulating as they're doing assessment. In other words, when you tell the child that you're going to get an A on this, for some children they don't really care. As the older you get, those grades make more of a difference in your self-regulation. But for younger children, they are very, they don't know how to delay gratification, to sit down and undergo a particular type of learning experience or something. So therefore, assessing and teaching and relying on grades isn't particularly effective with younger children. And so one of the other components of developing appropriate practice is integrating teaching in with your curriculum. Integrate the assessment in with teaching and curriculum. And to do that, we want to be able to observe children, listen, check in during regular ongoing activities like we saw in the block scenario where children don't know they're being assessed. And then document that learning, and ways to document that learning that's hard to gather through question and answers and sit down informal type of standardized assessments requires that we document through written notes, photographs, audio recordings, and work samples. And parents really do appreciate seeing that when you take pictures of children with the parent's permission, of course, because nowadays you need to get parent permission. But when you share that type of narrative and qualitative information with parents, it shows them that you've really thought deeply about what their children are doing, and think about them instead of just saying this is what they don't know. This is their strength, and this is their growth area. We don't want to compare children to other children when we're talking to parents about what their children know and how their children are learning. Now, when you look at doing this type of assessment with informal assessment that requires you interacting with children, it requires you to know a lot about human development and know also to be in to have a strong relationship with students. In other words, think about when you invite an outsider to come in and assess a child. The child sometimes is scared of that person. They don't know who they are. And when that person outside of assessor comes in, sometimes the information they get from that child isn't as strong as what the teacher could get from the child, because the teacher knows how to allay children's fears, or they know how to interact with them. They know what makes them upset, and they can interact with the child in a way to get good information from them. So that's an important thing to remember when you are assessing. The other thing is that when you're looking at different types of assessment measures, there are different ways of collecting that through child watching, or it could be a performance-based task where you're sitting and asking the child to do a particular task after a particular learning activity, collecting their work sampling, or just like we saw in the first video, the questioning or interviews. And then just some of the ways I've provided a pictorial example of what some of those forms of documentation would be, what anecdotal records are, what photographs, learning work samples, and portfolios would contain. Again, those are valid forms of documentation that can supplement and inform the tests that you give or assessments that you're giving. They're more formal in nature, and they should inform that information you glean from those types of documentation. Now, when you're talking about anecdotal observations are very difficult to do, but it requires that you be able to have a system ready where you can document what you're seeing. And what you see here in this screen is a teacher who writes the child's name down and then dates it and then writes down what she sees the child doing. Now, with what can happen is, and this teacher is using sticky back labels that we use for address labels, which is a good way of keeping your documentation together without it falling all over the place. Like Post-it notes aren't particularly effective in that area. And being able to think about what I suggest doing, or what a lot of teachers do, and we'll see this is another type of anecdotal record that's more systemic, that really provides not only just checklist information, but also has the date and time and what time of year, so that the teacher's not having to do so much documentation and can actually focus in on the behavior that she's seeing the child do. Now, what this right here is an example from a teacher that here in Texas who is taking on a regular basis different anecdotal records of a particular child. And notice that it was spread out throughout the year. What this teacher did was that she observed, and this is a way to systematize your assessment, she observed 5 children on one day, 5 children on the next day, 5 children on the next day, so that over that 5-day period of a whole week, she observed all the children in her class. So it enabled her to have a system of making sure that she was checking in on all children. And she used Friday to catch up on the time when children were absent. And then on Fridays, or at the end of a particular 9-week reporting period, she took all of those notes, whether it be sticky notes or whether they be address labels. The benefit for sticky notes is they're not as expensive as address labels. But she took all of those notes and she organized them in a way so that she could reflect on what different skills and domains has she been observing throughout the time that she's been looking at these students. And that helped her get more of a clear focus of what she was looking at. Now, other types of documentation that are valid as well are teacher-developed checklists, the types of assessments that they do, like point to this number, what does this number say, point to this letter. That's a valid form of documentation. Also, if you look here in this is an example of a work sample. A work sample not being something that you ask the child to do, but rather you collect. What you see here is a picture of a girl who was playing in the dramatic play center. And even though she was playing, the teacher noticed that the child was in her play scenario, was writing a letter that said, I'm going to go to a babysitter. And we see here, just by this one work sampling, that we can verify, well, this child knows is at a particular stage in emergent writing, which is at a phonemic speller or invented spelling stage. And so it provides documentation that shows and provides proof that the child knows this many letters, they know these many sounds, without having to go in and actually perform an actual assessment. And then down below, you see a picture of a child's block center construction where they made a zoo. And what that child did is they went and they wrote the word zoo on the gate. And you can see there the child knows something about classification, they know something about symmetry, they know something about letters. So it when you put all of that information together, make sure that the more documentation that you have over a period of time helps to solidify the decisions you make about where children are at particular stages on a continuum. And when I talk about, and this is something I want you to think about before I get into look at an actual that Frog Street is developing, is how assessment can impact instruction. This is an example from a book from Bedrove and Leon called Tools of the Mind, and they talk about dynamic assessment. And this child, this teacher, kind of shows you how teachers assess as they're working with kids. It shows the thought patterns. This child was asked to write his name, and what you see on the left-hand side of the slide is what Anthony did when he was asked to write his name, and that looks like what a lot of children just scribble. But she knew something about Anthony, and she knew that he knew the first letter of his name because of her several interactions with him. So she asked him to find his name among all other names, and when she removed all the names that began with A, and taught him how to write the letter A down, across, giving him some silent speech, and then held his hand to show him how to make that letter. When she asked him to write again, he wrote the letter A. He didn't write all the words that you see on the right side of the screen there down below, but he did write that letter A at the top. And that's an example of how just through a little bit of instruction as you're working with kids, that little bit of scaffolding can actually help children increase their level of performance. And so sometimes children's performance is enhanced through scaffolding. And that's one thing that we want to be able to document, that even though a child doesn't know how to write their name, when I provide these different types of supports, they do. And so here we see in the next screen, Anthony making more progress throughout the year after several weeks. What you see on the right side of the screen is how he's writing his name now. And what happens when the teacher responds to this by giving him a name card with his name on it and showing him a dot where he begins because he writes his name backwards. So she showed him a dot card that has an arrow going forward. And after that little bit of scaffolding, he was able to produce what you see on the left side. Again, an improvement. And then finally, as we go through the year, through more practice, this is what Anthony's now doing. And notice that the teacher changed, instead of giving him the card that has the dot that shows how the directionality of writing, now she notices that he is skipping letters in his name and not including certain letters. So what she does here is she underlines letters that he's missing. And through that different type of support, he eventually gets to what you see there on the arrow pointing down. He finally gets to where you can write his name perfectly, not perfectly, but coherently enough to where you can read it. And we see that's how children progress throughout the year when when teachers assess while they're teaching. You need to remember that when you teach, you are always assessing and you're making decisions about what to do next based upon those intuitions. So to help teachers with that, that's a very important thing to do when you communicate your assessment goals and with parents, that you show them that type of documentation. What I'm going to show you in the next slide is our kind of a preview of our Frog Street Birth to 5 assessment. What we're hoping to do is to allow there to be we're developing a 9-level learning progressions, 61 learning progressions that can be measured on 9 different levels that span from infant to kindergarten entry. And when teachers look at taking all the documentation that they've gathered, including their summative assessments with standardized assessments, and then also with their formative type of assessments that they've given, at certain points in time throughout the year, they can make decisions on where is this child within this particular level. And that can be ongoing throughout the child's age span until they enter kindergarten. This is another example, and what we're hoping to develop for teachers is what we call assessment strategy cards and scoring cards. The front page being the assessment strategies, that we've designated the different ways that you can assess children in a formative way through observation, which is indicated through an icon of an eye, a checklist for anecdotal records, videotaping or clinical interviews, and then looking on the back side of the card to determine how that particular progression is being measured. Then also what you'll find is that when you look closely here at this particular, this is one of the learning progressions. This is measuring social emotional, that we have level 1 being tied to infants, level 2 also being tied to infants, but at a higher age range, and the ages increase. But in addition to that, when it says, for example, for an infant, that an infant attends to the emotional expression of others, what you see there in italics are behaviors and examples that clarify what that means. Teachers can determine, is the child approaching that particular level? Are they accelerating? Meaning, are they, when it says approaching, they demonstrate that knowledge through scaffolding and intensive scaffolding and support. When you score accelerating, you're saying they still need support, but now they're becoming more independent. And when you say they're arriving at that level, you're saying they do that without any sort of support, and they do it consistently throughout time. So you're able to really calibrate and specify your measurements as you go through. In addition to that, we're hoping to make our assessment something that can be handled online, that you can enter this data online, and then once you enter the data, you can eventually then get reports. This is an example of how you would go through, depending upon the grade. If the child is infant, pre-K3 or pre-K4, it selects the particular developmental progression you're looking for. And then after you enter all of that information, whether if it's beginning of the year, middle of the year, or end of year, then you get scores that are printed out that shows how the child is progressing over a period of time. And these, again, there's different types of reports that we can give that are both individual child, but also looks at class review for administrators. Parents wouldn't see the administrator view of doing class comparisons. But we're hoping to produce something that will, again, be like a toolbox for teachers as they begin to organize all of their documentation and look at ways that they can be responsive to children. So I wish you great luck with your toolbox, your assessment toolbox. And I'm going to stop here to see if we can fill any questions right quick.
Well, hello, everyone. Stephen Veit back again. Brian, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Been looking at the comments over on the left side of the screen, and everybody's been very, very happy and been gleaning a lot of great information. And yes, we do have a couple of questions here that I've been looking at during the webinar. The first one comes from Deborah, I think it's pronounced Feeney, from Georgia. And she asked, with the information that you are presenting, is this just for a traditional early childhood classroom, or can this be applied for informal education environments such as public libraries?
I would say so. I mean, anytime that you are working with groups of children, and I'm sure that librarians do, you can always, anytime you're interacting with children, looking at what children are doing through work sampling or how they use the the technological resources in the library to locate different resources in the library. I think that it's something that can be used. Anytime you're doing any type of interaction with children, you're always assessing them informally. So I think it is very applicable to that.
Okay, fantastic. Jacqueline Randolph asked, can the approaches to learning be used for fourth grade learners on a grade on E level? I think is what she said here.
Yes, I think when you start getting into fourth grade, children become better self-regulated. And I'm sure the fourth grade teacher's smiling underneath her. But they're not like 4-year-olds that you can't tell if it's misbehavior or is it just poor regulation. But for fourth graders, they become a little bit better at understanding what that grade means. So I think, yes, you could do some rubrics with approaches to learning.
Fantastic. Deborah Feeney from Georgia had another question. So why isn't performance assessment used instead of a written tool?
That's a good question. I think that what's happening is that's a very good question. These written type standardized assessments, the advantage to them is that they can be administered quickly. But however, you need to be careful because I've seen where there are these types of assessments that can be administered quickly, but there's so many different dimensions of understanding that you're trying to assess that you have to assess several different questions. And after 15 minutes, 4-year-olds lose their attention. And so it becomes incredibly difficult to administer a standardized measure with 4-year-olds because they can't pay attention for that long. So you have to break up the assessment into different pieces. And performance-based assessments, like you say, allow children to perform right there in the context that's meaningful to them. So I agree with that.
Fantastic. All right. Looks like John Dussault from Washington wants to know, do you have any experience with assessment in simulated environments?
No, I do not have any, that is now, interestingly, I do know that there is technology out there, for instance, for coaches who are looking at how their football players play on the field. That a lot of times they have digital now video footage that they go back and track over a period of time and go back and really analyze that data and look for patterns in what the football players are doing. And so that could be a very interesting way of looking at, if you would need to have permission from parents to be able to videotape children in that type of way. But I think that simulated type of environments like that is a way of being able to see how people respond in real time. So I think that's a very interesting option and something that should be developed.
Sure. All right. Kavitha wants to know, what is a best or your best kindergarten readiness checklist?
Well, there isn't, again, like I say, a single tool that can solve all of those questions, but I think a readiness checklist should include features that should be multidimensional, meaning that you're not just looking at easily observable skills like letter recognition, but you're also looking at things that require you to look at how children perform in authentic context, like we saw in the video of the boys in the block center, and being able to, if your checklist had kind of like a rubric scale that said on a level from 1 to 4, this is how, and define what you mean by 1, 2, 3, and 4, then I think your checklist can be better calibrated to meet all the different dimensions that you're trying to measure.
Okay. Lane Schreiber from Massachusetts wants to know, if a child shows strong sensory integration issues, is there a correlation with ADD?
That is a really good question that I am not trained to answer, and that is that requires someone, again, and that's a very good question, because there are specific type of assessments and that's the reason why I say we want to be careful about making diagnoses about children without having some type of, in those situations, we want to have a test that is specifically designated to assess those particular learning disabilities, and we call those things screeners. And those are administered through a standardized type of measurement where you ask certain questions at certain times with certain prompts, and it's very important to use those. You can use documentation that you've gathered to substantiate your decision to use that type of measurement, but you can't use that type of measurement when you are use your observations just by and diagnose a child on the basis of just pure observation. Sure.
All right, got a couple more here. Maud from New York. Is this similar to the work sampling system?
Absolutely. Sam Meisel's is in my opinion, a ground runner in early childhood education, and he developed the work sampling system, and it is an example of how to use multiple forms of documentation to verify how children are performing, again, because of the difficulty of assessing young children's knowledge. But yes, work sampling system is fabulous.
Sure. All right, last one. Marie Gerke from New Jersey. How are assessments used to address developmental delays, especially those that need medical intervention?
Again, those developmental delays, there are specific screeners that are designed to make those type of diagnoses. However, there's a protocol to follow that once you have observed children and it warrants, you're thinking, there's something besides, I've tried all of these different strategies. If you can document how you've tried different strategies and they're not working, then when you approach your administrator or the parent, you have good documentation to say, well, let's try giving this more standardized measure. So in other words, there's protocols. You first of all gather your information before you go and make those type of high stakes decisions about placement. Okay, great.
And Stephen Fight from Edmond, Oklahoma wants to know, did your cat sit in your lap the entire presentation?
I think Jack did. And by the way, if you didn't know, this is Jack. For those of you out there who want to see Jack, he just sits here. He's a black cat who is perfect for Halloween.
Fantastic. Hey, Brian, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you for the third time in the last couple of years. Always amazing information. And always, I see wonderful feedback on the left side of the screen from people who are watching and viewing your webinars. And I know that you are giving them a lot of great information. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us again today.
Thank you too, Stephen. We appreciate it. Have a good Thanksgiving.
All right, you do the same, sir. All right, well, we want to thank each and every one of you that are still here with us today that showed up. Hope that you were able to take some wonderful information back to you before the Thanksgiving break and things that you'll be able to put to use on Monday of next week. Just a quick little note, if you would like to see Brian live, Dr. Mowry will be at the Splash in Grapevine, Texas this coming July 25th through the 27th, 2018. It is a wonderful conference. It's at least 26 years old now. Last conference, we had over 2,400 early childhood educators in one place. I have a good source that tells me that Steve Spangler, the science guy, will be one of the keynotes coming up for the Splash in 2018. So it's going to be a fun conference, and we definitely invite you to join us. If you've never been, it is a treat, and they treat early childhood educators like they are queens and kings. So make sure that you try to plan to attend. We want to again thank Dr. Brian Mowry for presenting for us today. You will see his information down there at the bottom, bmowry@frogstreet.com if you would like to email him. I'm sure he will be happy to answer any questions that you have that you would like to post to him via email. And you can also find out more about Frog Street at www.frogstreet.com. Well, to get your CE certificate, as I said at the beginning, if you logged in live, you will be receiving that within 24 hours to the email that you used to log in with. If you're watching this as a recording, you will need to find the quiz and take it, and you will fill that out, and you will be emailed your certificate shortly thereafter. And be sure to look at some of the other archived webinars that you will find there from the past. Wonderful, wonderful information that you can use in your classroom. If you are not a member of edweb.net, we certainly invite you today to join. It is a wonderful, wonderful resource for you as an early childhood teacher, and we would love for you to be a part of the Early Childhood Learning Solutions community sponsored by Frog Street Press. As we said, you'll have a lot of wonderful resources at your disposal, online discussions that you can join in with or even start your own thread if you have a question. There's a cadre of early childhood educators out there that would love to chime in and give you their take on whatever problem that you might be having. You can, again, view those edWebinar recordings, take the quizzes for CE certificates, and see your webinar activity. Well, we want to thank all of you again for joining us today. We hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving, a wonderful rest of your November, and that you head in strong to December and make it to the holiday break. So thank you guys very much. My name is Stephen Fite again, speaking for Dr. Brian Mowry. We are so happy that you were here today, and we will see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.